My name is Olivia Bennett. I was 27 years old the day my family gathered to hear my grandmother's will. My Aunt Karen sat confidently at the head of the conference table. My cousin Mason was already talking about buying a yacht. Everyone in the room believed they knew exactly how the story would end. After all, Grandma Eleanor Bennett had built a furniture company worth tens of millions of dollars. And everyone assumed they knew who would inherit it. Karen had spent years calling herself Eleanor's rightful successor. Mason had already introduced himself to people as the future CEO. And me, I was just Olivia, the quiet granddaughter, the one who worked in the company but never demanded attention, the one everyone overlooked, the one they assumed would receive a sentimental keepsake and a polite thank you. What none of them knew was that 6 months before Grandma died, she had quietly made a decision that would change everything. A decision she never shared with anyone except her attorney. And by the time my family arrived to divide her estate, I already owned the company they were fighting over. Growing up in the Bennett family taught me something early. Success wasn't admired. It was expected. Failure wasn't discussed. It was remembered. My grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, built Bennett Home Designs from a tiny workshop into one of the most respected luxury furniture companies in New England. She started with almost nothing. No wealthy investors. No family fortune. Just talent, discipline, and an unwillingness to quit. By the time I was born, she was already a legend in the business world. My mother died when I was 8 years old. My father remarried 3 years later and moved across the country. After that, Grandma became the closest thing I had to a parent. She attended every school event. She taught me how to drive. She called every Sunday, and she never missed a birthday. But in the eyes of the rest of the family, I was never considered important. Karen was the obvious heir. At least that's what Karen believed. She reminded everyone of it constantly. Mason was treated like the future king of the company. People discussed strategy with him, investments with him, expansion plans with him. With me, they discussed the weather. Family dinners always followed the same pattern. Karen talked, Mason bragged, everyone listened, and I quietly helped clear the dishes afterward. As I got older, I joined the company. Not as an executive, not as a director, not as a future owner. I started at the bottom. Customer service, inventory management, shipping coordination, anything that needed to be done. Karen loved making jokes about it. If Grandma really believed in you, she once said, you'd have an office upstairs. Everyone laughed, including Mason. I laughed too, mostly because arguing never changed anything. But Grandma never seemed interested in titles. Instead, she watched people. She noticed who stayed late when problems appeared, who helped employees without being asked, who accepted responsibility when mistakes happened, and who still cared when nobody was watching. Karen talked constantly about ownership. Mason talked constantly about profits. Grandma rarely seemed impressed. Over the final years of her life, Grandma slowly stepped away from daily operations. Everyone assumed she was preparing for retirement. What they didn't realize was that she was testing people. Observing, listening, taking notes. Karen wanted to sell the company. She believed it had reached maximum value. Mason wanted aggressive expansion, more debt, more risk, faster growth. Neither one spent much time talking about employees, or customers, or the values Grandma had spent 40 years building. Meanwhile, I just kept doing my job. Not because I expected anything. Because I genuinely loved the company. The people there felt like family. In many ways, they were more supportive than my actual relatives. Every week I visited Grandma. Sometimes we discussed business. Sometimes we discussed books. Sometimes we sat quietly and watched old movies. One evening, 6 months before she died, I visited her in the hospital. She looked smaller than usual, older, more fragile, but her eyes were still sharp. She looked at me and asked a question. Olivia, if you knew you'd never inherit $1 from me, would you still come visit every week? I laughed. Of course. She smiled. I know. Then she said something I didn't fully understand at the time. When people think you have no power, they show you exactly who they are. A week later, Grandma asked me to meet her attorney. I assumed she needed help reviewing paperwork. Instead, I found myself sitting in a conference room covered with legal documents. The attorney explained everything. Grandma had already made her decision. The company would not be transferred through her will. Instead, ownership would transfer immediately through a private succession agreement. The documents gave me 100% voting control, full ownership authority, the right to appoint leadership, the final say over company operations. Legally, permanently, irrevocably. I stared at the papers. I don't understand. Grandma smiled. I know exactly what I'm doing. I tried to argue. She refused to listen. Her answer was simple. Ownership is not a reward. She tapped the documents. It's a responsibility. 6 months later, Grandma passed away peacefully. The funeral was packed. Executives, employees, friends, family. Everyone came. Karen cried publicly. Mason gave interviews about preserving Grandma's legacy. I mostly stayed quiet. Grief has a way of making performances easier to recognize. A week later, the family gathered at the attorney's office for the reading of the will. Karen arrived wearing confidence-like jewelry. Mason looked excited. The attorney began reading. The process lasted nearly 2 hours. Investment accounts, properties, vehicles, collectibles, cash reserves. Everyone received something. Then finally my name appeared. I inherited a single item. Grandma's old pocket watch. Mason actually laughed. Karen smiled sympathetically. Oh, Olivia. Several relatives chuckled. I thanked the attorney and accepted the watch. Nothing more, nothing less. That evening the family gathered for dinner. Karen ordered champagne. Mason proposed a toast. To Grandma's wisdom. Everyone raised their glasses. Karen smiled at me. She always knew who could handle real responsibility. Several relatives laughed. I smiled politely, then looked down at the pocket watch. Inside was a tiny key. Exactly where Grandma told me it would be. The key wasn't for a lock. It was a reminder, a signal. Tomorrow everything would change. The next morning, company leadership received an urgent email. Mandatory board meeting. Attendance required. Karen assumed she would be introduced as the new leader. Mason assumed the same. When they entered the conference room, they froze. The attorney was there. The board members were there. The CFO was there. And I was sitting at the head of the table. Karen frowned. What's going on? The attorney stood. Then he began speaking. 6 months ago, Eleanor Bennett executed a succession agreement transferring full ownership and voting control of Bennett Home Designs to Olivia Bennett. The room went silent. Karen blinked. Mason laughed nervously, then stopped laughing, because nobody else was. The attorney distributed copies. Every signature was valid. Every filing was complete. Every transfer had already occurred. There was nothing to contest. Nothing to stop. Nothing to reverse. Karen eventually found her voice. Why? The attorney opened an envelope. Inside was Grandma's final letter. He began reading. To my family. Many of you believe ownership should belong to the person who wants it most. I disagree. Ownership belongs to the person willing to carry its weight. Over the last decade I have watched every one of you. Some of you wanted my company. Only one of you cared for it. Some of you wanted control. Only one of you accepted responsibility. Some of you measured success by money. Olivia measured it by people. That is why she is my successor. Not because she asked, because she never did. By the time the attorney finished reading, nobody spoke. Karen sued. She lost. Mason threatened legal action. His lawyers advised against it. Several relatives stopped speaking to me. Others suddenly became very friendly. Neither reaction surprised me. What did surprise me was how calm I felt. For years I believed I needed my family's approval. Now I understood something different. Approval and respect are not the same thing. And sometimes people only respect what they can no longer control. 1 year after Grandma's death, I sat in her old office. The pocket watch rested on my desk. Inside was a small photograph of the two of us. I remembered her final lesson. Money doesn't tell you who loves you. It tells you who loves money. Outside my office window, hundreds of employees were working. Families depended on this company. Careers depended on it. Dreams depended on it. And for the first time, I truly understood what Grandma had given me. She hadn't left me a business. She had left me her trust. And that was worth far more than the company itself. Because in the end, the people who spent years fighting over ownership never understood what ownership really meant. Grandma did, and thanks to her, now I do too. If there's one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it's this. The people who deserve power are usually the ones who spend the least time chasing it. And the people who truly love you will never measure your worth by what they can gain from you. Grandma understood that. That's why she trusted me. And every day, I try to be worthy of that trust.